Imagine boarding a private jet that you own only to be told you don't belong in first class. Alicia Carter, a powerful black CEO, faces cold dismissal, silent judgment, and even physical removal on her own flight. How does a woman so calm and resolute become the spark that ignites a storm of justice at 30,000 feet? What happens when privilege meets quiet defiance in a space meant for the elite? This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a raw, emotional journey into the heart of systemic discrimination where rules are wielded as weapons and dignity is questioned because of skin color and appearance. How far will one woman go to reclaim her rightful place? Will the invisible barriers of bias finally crumble, or will silence and complicity win again? Join us as we take you through Alicia's fight for justice, an inspiring tale of courage, resilience, and the power of standing firm when the world tries to erase you. If you believe in truth, equality, and the power of one voice to change everything, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive into this unforgettable story together. Alicia Carter stepped onto the sleek cabin floor of the Skyward Airlines Gulfstream G650 with a quiet confidence that only years of experience and inner strength could give. The polished wood paneling gleamed softly under the warm, recessed lighting. Plush cream leather seats lined the spacious cabin, each meticulously set with a white linen napkin and an elegant menu card. The faint hum of the engines and the subtle scent of fresh coffee filled the air. She paused briefly near the entrance, adjusting the strap of her simple leather bag. Alicia wasn't a woman who wore her wealth on her sleeve. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her attire, a modest cream blouse and tailored navy trousers, was practical, unassuming. There was no designer logo to catch a glance, no flashy jewelry to draw eyes. She preferred to blend in quietly, even though everyone here was about to find out she didn't belong to quiet. As she walked further into the cabin, eyes flickered toward her, some curious, some guarded, among the elite passengers settled into their first-class seats. The whispers were nearly inaudible, but unmistakable. Who is she? Why is she here? Is she in the wrong place? The flight attendant at the door, Lily Morgan, barely glanced up as Alicia passed. A slight curl of the lip was the only acknowledgement, part disdain, part boredom. Alicia held her head high, feeling the weight of those silent judgments, but refusing to be bowed. Near the cockpit door stood Captain Evelyn Shaw, arms crossed, her blonde hair tightly wound into a perfect bun. She regarded Alicia coolly, the cold blue of her eyes cutting through the warmth of the cabin like a sharpened blade. Captain Shaw was a woman used to command, used to control. She didn't offer a smile or a greeting. Instead, her voice was clipped, rehearsed. "Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass and priority verification before you settle into first class." Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out a plain, unbranded card, her boarding pass. It was discreet, lacking the bold gold strip or holographic logo that screamed elite passenger. The card bore only her name and the flight number, SCOWY 123, from New York to San Francisco. She handed it over with steady hands, locking eyes with Captain Shaw. The captain took the card gingerly, as if afraid to touch something dirty. Her gaze flicked over the information, but made no attempt to scan it electronically. "Unverified," she said flatly, her voice echoing faintly in the hushed cabin. "You'll need to move to economy or wait until your status is confirmed." Alicia's lips pressed into a thin line. The humiliation was sharp, but contained. She inhaled deeply, the leather of her bag creaking softly in her grip. Around her, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit smirked and shifted in his seat. Gregory Cole, a frequent Skyward client, was known for his subtle but unmistakable disdain for anyone who didn't belong. He leaned toward the aisle, rolling his eyes and loudly commenting, First class isn't for just anyone. You know, his words weren't just audible, they were aimed like darts, meant to sting. Alicia caught the glance of a few nearby passengers. Some looked away quickly, others whispered behind hands. The invisible barrier of exclusion was crystal clear. Jason Lee, a travel blogger of Asian descent, seated near the rear, quietly pulled out his phone, calm and collected. He began recording, framing Alicia's calm defiance against the cold, orchestrated rebuff. He had seen this story play out too many times before in airports, hotels, restaurants, but today he knew something was different. Alicia's thoughts churned beneath the surface. She'd spent decades climbing corporate ladders, breaking ceilings, and proving herself in boardrooms dominated by privilege and bias. Yet here she was on her own jet, owned by her company, being treated like an outsider. Was this her fight today? Was it worth turning a private moment into a public battle? The questions flickered briefly in her mind, but her resolve was firm. She glanced at the faces around her, some confused, some indifferent, some openly hostile. The weight of isolation settled around her like a cloak. But Alicia did not flinch. The fight ahead was not one of volume or anger. It was one of quiet dignity and unyielding strength. Captain Shaw's voice cut again through the murmur of the cabin. You have until takeoff to provide verification. Otherwise, you'll be moved to economy, with or without your cooperation. The words hung in the air. The passengers absorbed the command as though it was inevitable law. No one spoke up for Alicia. No one challenged the captain's authority. Yet the camera's red recording light glowed steadily, capturing every moment. Alicia caught Jason's eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent pact between two strangers amid injustice. This was more than a boarding dispute. It was a collision of worlds, a test of who had the right to claim space, dignity, and respect at 30,000 feet. As the plane's engines hummed louder, ready to push back from the gate, Alicia steadied herself. 5 minutes. That was all it would take for the course of the flight, and perhaps the skies themselves to change forever. The cabin of the Skyward Airlines Gulfstream was a bubble of polished luxury. But for Alicia Carter, it felt like a cage closing tighter with every passing second. She could sense the invisible barrier, the line that no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone knew was there. The line that separated the accepted from the outsider, the worthy from the unworthy. Gregory Cole, seated across the aisle, shifted in his seat with an air of ownership. His tailored navy suit clung impeccably, his silver cufflinks catching the soft cabin light. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left Alicia. When she moved to place her roller bag under the seat in front of her, his hand deliberately blocked the aisle with his briefcase. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. This space was his. Alicia's gaze met his for a moment, a calm, steady look that didn't back down. But inside, a quiet storm raged. She could feel the weight of every judgment, every unspoken thought in the cabin. This was no ordinary flight. It was a microcosm of the world, outside a place where privilege and prejudice intertwined invisibly, like threads woven into the fabric of society. The murmurs of passengers swirled softly, like a breeze rustling dry leaves. A woman 2 rows behind clutched her designer purse a little tighter, her eyes narrowing as they flicked toward Alicia. A young man wearing thick glasses shook his head at his companion and whispered something Alicia didn't catch, nor did she want to. Alicia's mind drifted inward. She remembered the countless board meetings where her ideas had been dismissed because of the color of her skin or the tone of her voice, the subtle interruptions, the lowered expectations, the assumptions she'd never be one of them. Here, thousands of feet above the ground, it was no different. Was this how it would always be? Was she doomed to be the perpetual outsider? The question gnawed at her, but she refused to let it break her. She had fought too hard to give in now. Her thoughts flickered to Jason Lee, who sat quietly at the back, phone in hand. She knew he was recording not out of voyeurism, but because he understood the weight of the moment. His calm, deliberate actions gave her a flicker of hope. Someone was watching. Someone would tell the story right. Captain Evelyn Shaw stood just a few feet away, arms crossed like an iron gate guarding a fortress. Her posture was rigid, her jaw set, her pale blue eyes locked onto Alicia with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. To Shaw, Alicia was a disruption, an anomaly that challenged the order Shaw was sworn to maintain. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," Shaw said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. "You're holding up the flight." The words hung heavy in the air, but Alicia's voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear. "I'm here on this flight as a passenger, Captain. I have every right to be in this seat." Shaw's lips tightened. "Your boarding pass does not confirm your priority status. Without that verification, you cannot remain in first class." Alicia wanted to ask, "Is that really the truth, or just the policy you use to exclude people like me?" But she held back. Instead, she let her eyes speak the defiance that words could not. Around her, the cabin's atmosphere thickened with tension. The invisible wall of prejudice grew taller with every sideways glance, every averted eye. No one dared challenge Shaw's authority. Not yet. Alicia felt the familiar ache of isolation, but refused to let it consume her. She was alone in this moment, yes, but her resolve was a quiet fire burning beneath her calm exterior. She could see the fear flicker briefly in some eyes, the discomfort that comes with witnessing injustice, but feeling powerless to intervene. Jason's phone camera captured it all. Every whispered insult, every smirk, every stifled sigh. He was a witness, a recorder of history unfolding silently at 30,000 feet. Alicia's internal struggle deepened. Was it worth it to push back now? The stakes were high. If she lost this battle, it could mean being physically removed, publicly humiliated. But if she gave in, what message would that send, not just to those on this plane, but to every woman, every person of color who had ever been told they didn't belong? Her mind flashed to her childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and the odds were stacked against her. She remembered her mother's steady hands, her father's unwavering belief that education and integrity could break any barrier. This was her moment to honor that legacy. She steadied her breath, pushing away the flicker of doubt. Alicia was more than a passenger. She was a symbol, a quiet but unbreakable force against the currents of exclusion. Meanwhile, Gregory Cole leaned toward the man beside him, voice low but sharp enough for Alicia to catch. "Zenith standards are slipping. It's turning into a free-for-all." His words were venomous, loaded with all the entitlement that fueled the system trying to push her out. Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant, hovered nearby, her expression unreadable, but her silence loud. She tapped something into her tablet, likely a note marking Alicia as a disruptive passenger. Not a single verification of Alicia's status was performed beyond the initial cold dismissal. First Officer Mark Daniels stood near the cockpit door, his posture hesitant. His eyes flicked nervously between Captain Shaw and Alicia. He said nothing. His silence was complicity. The tension thickened like a tightening noose. Alicia felt the weight of countless unseen hands trying to push her down, but she planted her feet firmly. Jason glanced at Alicia and nodded slightly. No words were exchanged, but the solidarity was clear. Alicia's quiet defiance was being transformed into a shared battle cry. As the plane's engines grew louder, signaling the imminent pushback from the gate, Alicia's internal voice steadied. This was not just about a seat on a plane. It was about justice, dignity, and refusing to be erased. 5 minutes. That was all it would take. The cabin lights cast a soft glow over the faces of the passengers seated comfortably in first class. The gentle hum of the plane's engines was a familiar background, usually a calming presence before the flight. But tonight, a different energy filled the air, a tension so palpable it pressed against every heart and mind aboard Sky 123. Captain Evelyn Shaw stepped forward, her tall silhouette rigid, the authority she wielded as sharp and unforgiving as the crisp lines of her uniform. Her eyes, icy and unyielding, locked onto Alicia Carter like a judge ready to pass sentence. "Ma'am." Shaw's voice was cold and measured, cutting through the murmurs and unsettled glances like a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm ordering you to vacate your seat in first class immediately." The cabin fell silent. Even the faint rustle of a magazine or the hum of a laptop seemed to pause in deference to those words. Alicia remained seated, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. The quiet strength radiating from her was a stark contrast to the cold command just issued. "I'm not going anywhere," Alicia replied calmly. Her voice was steady, unshaken, carrying the weight of conviction and years of fighting to be seen and respected. Captain Shaw's lips pressed into a thin line, and she took a step closer. "You have not provided valid priority verification, and this is a security and safety protocol. Your refusal to comply disrupts the order and safety of this flight." Around them, passengers shifted uneasily. Some looked down at their phones, pretending disinterest. Others exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke up. The unspoken message was clear: challenge the captain at your own risk. Alicia's mind flashed back to every meeting where she'd been told, "You don't fit the profile." Every time her ideas were sidelined, or her presence made others uncomfortable, she felt the sting of those old wounds rise, but she refused to let them control her now. Her hand brushed the smooth leather of her roller bag, grounding herself in the present. She looked back at Captain Shaw, unwavering. "Being unverified is your judgment, not mine," Alicia said quietly but firmly. "I'm here. I have every right to this seat. Denying me is not policy, it's prejudice." Captain Shaw's eyes narrowed. "This is not about prejudice. This is about following regulations." Alicia's gaze swept the cabin, faces averted. Some hardened in silent approval of Shaw's words, others tinged with discomfort. The invisible wall between them and me was impenetrable. Gregory Cole smirked from his seat, tapping his silver watch impatiently. "Let's keep the airspace clear for those who belong here," he sneered, loud enough for Alicia to hear. Alicia's jaw clenched briefly, but her voice stayed steady. "Belonging isn't dictated by your watch or your wallet." Jason Lee, seated further back, kept recording, his steady hand capturing every moment. He caught the look in Alicia's eyes, the fierce but measured resolve that spoke louder than any words. Captain Shaw turned to Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant. Lily nodded once and tapped rapidly on her tablet. "Security will be on standby," she said softly but firmly. Alicia felt the weight of the moment. She was surrounded by a system designed to exclude, to suppress, to erase. Yet she was not alone. The technology in Jason's hands, the silent support of some passengers, and her own inner strength formed a bulwark against the creeping darkness. First Officer Mark Daniels lingered near the cockpit door, his expression conflicted but silent. His hesitation was palpable, caught between duty and conscience. Alicia's thoughts wandered briefly to the young women she mentored, the people counting on her to break barriers. Could she afford to falter now? Could she let the silence win? Her fingers curled around the handle of her bag, nails pressing into the leather. She breathed in slowly, centering herself. "Yes, I refuse to leave this seat," she said, "because my presence here challenges the status quo, and it's a challenge long overdue." The cabin remained hushed, the tension thick as fog. Some passengers exchanged nervous glances, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared intervene. Captain Shaw's gaze hardened. "Then you will be removed forcibly, and this will be recorded as a security violation." Alicia's heart beat faster, but her exterior remained calm. She met Shaw's stare without flinching. In that moment, the invisible boundary shattered not with noise, but with quiet defiance. Jason's camera captured every second the cold command, the unwavering resistance, the oppressive silence. This was no longer just a conflict over seating. It was a confrontation between an entrenched system and a force refusing to be erased. 5 minutes in, and the fight for justice had only just begun. The cabin remained locked in silence, but beneath the surface, currents of unease rippled through the passengers. Alicia Carter sat upright, her posture unyielding, as if the very air around her was a fortress, shielding her from the cold commands and sneers. Her eyes, dark and steady, did not waver from the piercing stare of Captain Evelyn Shaw. She was not angry, not yet. There was a quiet defiance that spoke louder than any raised voice. Alicia understood the power of restraint. It was a strength honed by years of navigating worlds that often sought to diminish her voice. But beneath that calm lay a fierce fire, a burning refusal to be erased. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Some whispered quietly, others exchanged glances loaded with unspoken questions. What would they do if faced with such injustice? Was it safer to remain silent or to stand up? Gregory Cole lounged smugly, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "I've seen a lot of nonsense in first class, but this takes the cake," he muttered loud enough for a few nearby to hear. He glanced around, seeking silent agreement. A couple of nods answered him, but others looked away, unwilling to be part of this chorus of exclusion. Alicia's gaze softened briefly as it swept the cabin. Among the sea of indifferent faces, she caught the eyes of a young woman clutching her purse. A subtle tremor in her expression betrayed sympathy. In that moment, Alicia recognized the familiar dance of courage and fear, the push and pull that held so many captive. Her thoughts flickered inward. Should she speak? Should she break the silence that wrapped the cabin like a heavy blanket? The risk was real. Speaking out could provoke escalation, could lead to forceful removal, humiliation broadcast to the world. But silence was complicity. She swallowed, steadying her breath. Words were powerful, but timing was everything. She waited. Meanwhile, Jason Lee, seated at the rear, continued filming steadily, his lens capturing not just Alicia, but the reactions, hesitations, smiles, murmurs of everyone around. He was not just a witness, but a bridge between this confined world and the countless others watching live across the globe. Alicia's mind flashed to her childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where voices were often muffled by circumstance. Her mother had taught her that silence could be weaponized, used by the powerful to suppress the vulnerable. But she had also taught her the power of measured speech, of waiting for the right moment to speak truth. Across the aisle, Captain Shaw's eyes narrowed, sensing the shift. The tension was no longer just between her and Alicia, but had begun to ripple through the cabin. Shaw's lips pressed tighter, a flicker of frustration crossing her usually impassive face. Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant, whispered into her tablet, fingers flying over the screen. She tapped a few keys. tagging Alicia as non-compliant and security risk without a shred of real verification. Her face was unreadable, a mask perfected by years of enforcing rules that often cloaked prejudice. First Officer Mark Daniels shifted nervously, eyes darting between Shaw and Alicia. His silence was thick with indecision. Part of him wanted to intervene, to speak up for what was right, but the weight of hierarchy and fear held him back. Alicia's heart beat steadily. She knew this was the moment many people faced every day, being silenced not by words, but by the weight of a system that refused to listen. But she refused to bow, slowly, deliberately. Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out her tablet. She activated the camera app and pointed it toward the cabin. The faces, the tension, the frozen moments, all captured in digital memory. Jason's eyes flicked toward her in recognition. They were allies now, part of a growing wave of resistance. Alicia spoke then, her voice low but clear. This isn't just about a seat. It's about who gets to sit at the table, who gets to be seen, and who is pushed aside. The cabin absorbed the words. A few heads nodded almost imperceptibly. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unable to deny the truth. Gregory Cole scoffed and shook his head, dismissing the sentiment with a wave. Enough of the drama. We're here to fly, not to stage a protest. Alicia's eyes locked with his for a heartbeat, then turned back to the cabin. Sometimes, the protest is the only way to change the flight path. She could feel the shift now, the subtle change in energy. The passengers were no longer mere observers, they were witnesses. And in witnessing, they were complicit in the choice to remain silent or to stand. Jason uploaded the footage live, his fingers tapping with urgency and care. Hashtags began to trend almost instantly. Hard justice in the skies. Flight for fairness. Stand with Alicia. Outside the plane, millions would soon watch the unfolding drama. But inside, the silence was thick with anticipation, fear, and hope. Alicia's internal struggle continued. The weight of expectation pressed against her, but so did the buoyancy of possibility. She was not just fighting for herself, but for every voice that had been muted. As the plane prepared for pushback, Captain Shaw's expression darkened. The authority she clung to was slipping, threatened not by noise or force, but by quiet, unyielding courage. The countdown to takeoff was ticking, but for Alicia, the real journey was just beginning. The soft click of Jason Lee's phone as he hit live echoed through the otherwise still cabin. Within seconds, the quiet confrontation in first class was no longer just confined to the Gulfstream G650. It was exploding across social media feeds around the world. Hashtags sparked like wildfire, igniting a storm of attention and support that Alicia Carter could have never anticipated when she first boarded the plane. She felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, not just those in the cabin, but millions beyond, watching, waiting, hoping. It was a strange sensation, simultaneously empowering and terrifying. In her seat, Alicia breathed slowly, steadying herself for what she knew would come next. Captain Evelyn Shaw's jaw tightened visibly as she stared at the screen of her tablet, scrolling through the flood of live comments and videos shared from Jason's feed. The cold authority she'd wielded moments before was beginning to erode under the pressure of public scrutiny. She exchanged a glance with First Officer Mark Daniels, whose nervous twitch betrayed his discomfort with the unfolding spectacle. Alicia's mind wrestled with doubt and resolve. The storm she'd ignited with her refusal to leave was swelling beyond the confines of the cabin. Was she ready to face the consequences? The public eye was unforgiving. What if the narrative was twisted? What if the backlash hurt more than helped? But then she thought of the countless faces from her past, the young women she'd mentored, the employees who looked to her for hope. the communities that needed representation. This was bigger than one flight, bigger than her alone. Her eyes scanned the cabin, noticing subtle shifts among the passengers. A few whispered encouragements, others shot apologetic glances in her direction. There was a growing current of sympathy, a silent solidarity beginning to ripple through the polished seats. Gregory Cole, once smug and assured, now sat stiffly, and his fingers drummed anxiously on the armrest. The ease with which he had wielded privilege moments before was suddenly uncertain. He glanced around, searching for allies, but many of the faces he once counted on looked away. Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant, tapped furiously on her tablet, sending a flurry of internal messages. The cold efficiency of her actions contrasted starkly with the human drama unraveling around her. She glanced briefly at Alicia, then at Jason's streaming phone, her eyes flickering with something unreadable, perhaps unease or the dawning realization that the rules she had always enforced might be broken now. First Officer Daniels approached Captain Shaw quietly, whispering something that made her lips press into a thinner line. The tension between them was palpable. Shaw, the iron-willed commander, and Daniels, the hesitant subordinate, caught between duty and conscience. Alicia's heart raced, but her exterior remained composed. She remembered the nights spent preparing for moments like this, moments when courage was not loud but steadfast, when victory wasn't measured in shouts but in steady presence. Suddenly, a murmur rose among the passengers. A middle-aged woman sitting near the window cleared her throat and spoke softly. "I'm sorry. Ma'am, I should have said something sooner." Heads turned. The cabin's heavy silence cracked. Others nodded, whispers spreading like wildfire. For the first time, Alicia wasn't alone. The flicker of solidarity was fragile but unmistakable. The invisible wall of exclusion was beginning to crumble under the weight of shared humanity. Captain Shaw's eyes flashed with irritation. "This is not a negotiation," she said sharply. "You are still required to comply with regulations." But the tide had turned. Passengers began pulling out their phones, recording, posting, sharing. Some reached out to Alicia, offering quiet words of support. Jason's live feed exploded with new followers and messages. The world was watching, and the story was no longer just about a seat on a plane. It was about systemic injustice, about voices long silenced, finally finding an echo. Alicia's internal struggle gave way to clarity. This was her moment not just to resist, but to lead. She spoke, her voice calm but unwavering. "This fight is not just mine. It's for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong because of how they look, where they come from, or what they wear." The cabin filled with a collective breath, a shared recognition of a truth too long ignored. Captain Shaw's posture stiffened, but the cracks in her armor were visible. "Security has been notified," she said, her voice steely. Alicia's gaze didn't falter. "Then let them come. But know this, I will not be moved. Not now. Not ever." As the plane began its slow pushback from the gate, the world outside was already shifting. Tweets, posts, and live streams carried Alicia's story into living rooms and boardrooms across the globe. The battle in first class was becoming a beacon, a call to action for justice and dignity in every space. 5 minutes had passed, but the fight was just beginning. The cabin air grew heavy with tension as the murmurs of passengers transformed into a low hum of unrest. Captain Evelyn Shaw's orders echoed like a command from an iron fist. Security was on its way, and the implications were clear. For Alicia Carter, the stakes had escalated far beyond a dispute over seating. They had become a test of her very dignity and rights. A sudden movement at the cockpit door drew every eye. Lucas Grant, the head of security for Skyward Airlines, stepped into the cabin. tall and imposing, his black uniform pressed sharply against his broad shoulders. Grant's expression was unreadable calm, but resolute. His eyes swept the cabin until they settled on Alicia. "Ma'am, you're being asked to vacate the first-class cabin immediately," he said with a voice devoid of warmth. "Failure to comply will result in physical removal." The words landed heavily, causing a ripple of unease among the passengers. A few gasped softly, others instinctively reached for their phones, cameras already recording. Jason Lee's phone was steady in his hand, capturing every moment with unwavering focus. Alicia remained seated, her hands resting gently on her bag in her lap. The fire inside her burned hotter, but her exterior stayed calm, a serene lake masking a current of unyielding strength. She met Grant's gaze with a faint, defiant smile, a challenge whispered in the silence between them. "I will not move," Alicia said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of unshakable resolve. Grant nodded once, signaling to a nearby crew member who nodded back before stepping forward. The cabin held its breath as two security personnel approached Alicia cautiously, suddenly, without warning. Grant reached out and snatched the tablet Alicia had been using to document the ordeal. It clattered to the floor with a harsh crack, the sound shattering the usual hum of the cabin. A collective gasp rose from the passengers. Shock painted their faces. The boldness of the move shocked even Gregory Cole, who momentarily lost his smug composure. His eyes widened as he witnessed the act of aggression. Alicia's fingers twitched, an almost imperceptible sign of pain as the tablet skittered away. But she remained silent, refusing to react with anger or fear. Lucas Grant's grip was firm, his demeanor that of a man carrying out orders rather than making a personal choice. Behind him, Captain Shaw and First Officer Daniels stood motionless, their expressions unreadable but complicit. Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant, watched with a detached expression, tapping a note on her tablet. Security intervention initiated. Passenger non-compliant. Jason's phone continued recording, hands trembling with anger. His fingers typed rapidly, broadcasting the moment live, captions flowing across the screen. Security forcibly removes passenger documenting discrimination. The shockwaves spread instantly. Passengers who had been hesitant now pulled out their phones, filming, photographing, and sharing. The silent complicity that had cloaked the cabin was breaking apart. Alicia's eyes locked onto Grant's, steady and unyielding. She was not broken, nor defeated. In that silent gaze was a promise the fight for justice would not end here. The flight attendants moved to guide Alicia towards the exit, but several passengers began murmuring objections. A middle-aged man seated near the window stood, his voice shaking but clear. "Wait. She has a right to be here." Another passenger, a young woman with tears in her eyes, whispered, "This isn't right. We need to stand with her." The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of quiet resistance. Even some crew members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of witnessing injustice pressing on their consciences. Alicia's internal battle was fierce. The sting of the tablet's loss, the physicality of the removal, it was a humiliation she did not deserve. Yet she found strength in the rising tide of support around her. The narrative was shifting. The victim was no longer alone. Outside the cabin, the world watched. Social media exploded with outrage and solidarity. Influencers, activists, and ordinary people shared Jason's footage, sparking conversations about racial bias and the abuse of power in elite spaces. Back in the cabin, Alicia allowed herself a brief breath, steadying her heart. The moment had passed, but the journey was far from over. Captain Shaw's authority was cracking under the pressure. Her gaze faltered as she glanced at the cabin screen streaming the live broadcast. The cold veneer of control was breaking apart. Lucas Grant's jaw tightened as he led Alicia towards the rear of the plane. His steps echoed with the finality of his actions, but Alicia's spirit marched with a quiet, unbreakable rhythm. 5 minutes had become a turning point, a fracture in a system that had long hidden behind silence and compliance. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted irrevocably. What began as a quiet scene of exclusion had erupted into a moment charged with urgency and a rising tide of defiance. Alicia Carter's forced removal had stirred something deeper among the passengers, an awakening long overdue. Soft murmurs grew into whispers, then into voices. A man seated near the window cleared his throat and spoke out, his voice tentative but resolute. "This isn't right. We can't just let this happen." Others followed. A woman near the aisle nodded, her eyes glistening. "She has every right to be here. We should stand with her." The chain reaction was subtle but unmistakable. What had once been a silent, complicit crowd was now slowly transforming into a community of witnesses willing, at last, to break the silence. Jason Lee's phone never stopped recording. His fingers flew across the screen, capturing every glance, every whispered conversation, every spark of courage. The live stream had ballooned into a movement, with thousands watching as the cabin slowly shed its collective fear. Alicia, now seated a few rows back and guarded by security, watched this transformation with a mixture of gratitude and determination. She had always known that change required more than just one person's courage. It needed others willing to speak out. Her eyes found the young woman who had spoken earlier. Their gazes locked, a silent exchange of hope and resolve passing between them. Behind the scenes, Captain Evelyn Shaw and First Officer Mark Daniels exchanged worried looks. The command they once wielded so effortlessly was unraveling under the weight of public scrutiny and growing resistance within the cabin. Shaw's voice, once sharp and commanding, now carried an edge of desperation. "We need to regain control. This situation is spiraling." Daniels nodded, swallowing hard. "But how the passengers are turning, and that live stream, it's everywhere." Lily Morgan, the lead flight attendant, was visibly shaken. Her fingers trembled as she sent another message through the internal system. Passenger unrest escalating, requesting guidance. Outside the plane, social media exploded. Activists, influencers, journalists, and everyday viewers flooded platforms with messages of support for Alicia. The hashtags, "Justice in the Skies," "Stand with Alicia," and "Flight for Fairness" trended worldwide. Back in the cabin, the crew's attempts to maintain order grew increasingly futile. Passengers who had remained silent now whispered words of encouragement to Alicia, some even discreetly filming the crew's every move. One passenger, a middle-aged man with a graying beard, stood and addressed the cabin. "If we don't stand up now, who will we all have to be the change we want to see?" Applause, soft at first, began to ripple through the cabin. It was a quiet revolution, but its message was deafening. Alicia's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and resolve. This was the moment she had hoped for, the moment when the invisible walls began to crumble. Brick by brick, Jason approached her quietly. "They're listening," he said, nodding toward the crowd. She smiled faintly. "Then we keep speaking." The rest of the flight felt different. The weight of injustice had been lifted slightly, replaced by a collective commitment to fairness and dignity. As the plane soared through the sky, Alicia sat tall, knowing that the fight was far from over, but for the first time, she was not alone. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight cruised steadily above the clouds, but the energy inside was anything but calm. The once silent spectators had become an audience to a story unfolding not just in this gilded space, but across the digital realm, reaching millions. The screens embedded in the seatbacks flickered suddenly, shifting from the standard flight information to a live news feed. The headline blazed across the monitors: CEO denied first class on own jet exposes airline discrimination. Passengers shifted, eyes widening. Murmurs rippled through the cabin as they turned toward the screens, their attention captured by the unfolding drama broadcast, not from afar, but within the very walls that confined them. Alicia Carter sat composed, her gaze calm and steady as the news anchor's voice echoed through the cabin speakers. The story detailed her struggle, her refusal to be moved, the cold dismissal by Captain Evelyn Shaw, the physical removal by security, and the growing groundswell of support fueled by Jason Lee's live stream. This revelation was a turning point, breaking through the carefully maintained facade of the airline's polished exterior. What had been an isolated incident was now a spotlight on systemic issues long buried beneath layers of corporate decorum. Captain Shaw's expression tightened as she watched the screen. Her authority, once unquestioned, was unraveling before her eyes. The composed mask she wore began to crack, revealing cracks of fear and uncertainty. First Officer Mark Daniels stood beside her, watching in silence. His conflicted gaze betrayed the weight of conscience meeting the harsh reality of complicity. Alicia's inner voice whispered, "You have been heard." The moment of invisibility was over. Passengers who had once hesitated now looked at Alicia with new eyes, some with admiration, others with remorse. A middle-aged woman near the window reached out to gently touch Alicia's hand, whispering, "Thank you for your courage." Gregory Cole, stripped of his smugness, sat frozen, the weight of his earlier disdain replaced by an unsettling silence. He looked around, realizing that the power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The cabin transformed into a space of reflection and reckoning. The revelation sparked conversations, breaking down invisible barriers and exposing truths too long ignored. In the midst of this, Alicia found her voice once more. Her words, calm yet resolute, echoed through the cabin's PA system, a clear and commanding presence. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel invisible or unworthy because of bias or prejudice. Today, we challenge that. We demand dignity, fairness, and respect, not just here in this cabin, but everywhere." Her message was met with nods and quiet applause. The atmosphere shifted from confrontation to connection, a shared understanding that justice was more than a personal victory. It was a collective responsibility. Jason's live stream continued to pulse through the digital veins of social media, amplifying Alicia's words and the powerful images of resilience and solidarity. Outside the plane, news networks scrambled to cover the story. Analysts debating the implications for the airline industry and beyond. Public officials called for investigations, and advocacy groups rallied behind Alicia's cause. Back in the cabin, the crew faced a reckoning. Airline executives, watching the live coverage from the ground, moved swiftly. The veneer of control shattered, replaced by urgent damage control and promises of reform. Alicia's quiet strength had ignited a movement, not just exposing discrimination, but demanding change. The revelation was more than a headline, it was a catalyst for transformation. As the plane soared toward its destination, the cabin's energy shifted from tension to hope. Passengers who had once turned away now sat with newfound respect, their eyes reflecting a shared commitment to a fairer sky. For Alicia, the revelation was a beginning, not an end. The fight for justice had taken flight, carried on the wings of truth and the courage to be seen. The moment the news of Alicia Carter's confrontation aboard Skyward Airlines Flight Sky 123 broke, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Within hours, social media platforms buzzed with outrage, solidarity, and calls for justice. News outlets raced to cover the story, broadcasting footage from Jason Lee's livestream that showed every tense exchange, every silent defiance, and the shocking physical removal. At the Skyward Airlines corporate headquarters, executives gathered in emergency meetings. Screens displayed the viral videos, accompanied by growing public pressure. The company's carefully cultivated image of luxury and exclusivity was crumbling under the weight of a scandal that exposed not just a single incident, but a systemic pattern of discrimination and abuse. Alicia's story had become a lightning rod for a wider conversation about race, privilege, and power in elite spaces. Advocates demanded accountability not just for the crew involved, but for the policies and culture that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. Back on the plane, Alicia sat quietly, watching the unfolding events through her phone. Messages of support flooded her inbox notes from colleagues, activists, strangers moved by her courage. Yet beneath the surge of hope, a deep sense of responsibility settled in her chest. This was no longer just her fight. The eyes of the world were upon her, and with that came the weight of expectation. Captain Evelyn Shaw and the crew were placed on immediate leave pending a full investigation. The airline issued a statement expressing regret for the incident and pledging a thorough review of their policies. But for many, including Alicia, words were not enough. As the investigation began, Alicia turned her attention to change, real, systemic change. She knew that breaking the silence was just the first step. Reform required vigilance, commitment, and the courage to dismantle entrenched systems of bias. In a carefully orchestrated press conference, Alicia addressed the media with clarity and conviction. She spoke not only of her experience, but of the countless others who had faced similar discrimination in silence. Discrimination is not a relic of the past, she declared. It is alive and active, often hidden behind policies, procedures, and assumptions. It's time for us to confront these realities head-on, to create spaces where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Her words resonated widely, sparking debates and inspiring initiatives across industries. Organizations began reevaluating their diversity and inclusion efforts, prompted by the raw honesty of Alicia's story. Yet, the path forward was fraught with challenges. Alicia grappled with the toll the public scrutiny took on her personal life. The constant spotlight, the barrage of opinions, the pressure to be a symbol of change, it was exhausting and isolating. There were moments of doubt. She questioned whether the fight was worth the personal cost. Could one woman really shift the tides of such a vast and deeply rooted system? But each time, doubt crept in. Alicia reminded herself of the faces that had looked to her for hope, the stories she had heard from those silenced by prejudice. Her resolve hardened. The fight for justice was bigger than any single individual. Meanwhile, the airline's internal audit, spurred by the public outcry, uncovered disturbing patterns. Multiple complaints against Captain Shaw revealed a history of biased treatment toward passengers of color and women. Lead flight attendant Lily Morgan's records showed unexplained alterations in passenger manifests, often disproportionately affecting marginalized customers. First Officer Mark Daniels, while not directly implicated in misconduct, faced scrutiny for his silence and failure to intervene. The airline promised comprehensive reforms, including mandatory anti-discrimination training and the establishment of independent oversight committees. The public response was overwhelming. Consumers began boycotting Skyward Airlines, while competitors pledged transparency and inclusivity. The aviation industry found itself at a crossroads, forced to confront uncomfortable truths and embrace meaningful change. Through it all, Alicia remained a steadfast beacon. She worked closely with advocacy groups, legal experts, and industry leaders to develop programs that would prevent future injustices. Her vision was clear: to transform not just one airline, but the entire culture of air travel. As months passed, the initial outrage evolved into sustained activism. Social media campaigns continued, new policies were implemented, and stories of discrimination once hidden were brought to light. Alicia's personal journey mirrored this transformation. She found strength in community, in shared purpose, and in the knowledge that her silence had been broken for good. Despite the hardships, she looked ahead with hope. The fight for fairness was ongoing, but the cracks in the system had become windows of opportunity. And in those windows, the future glowed brightly. Months had passed since the turbulent flight that changed everything. The skies seemed different now, not just because of clearer blue horizons or gentler winds, but because the air itself carried the promise of change. For Dr. Alicia Carter, the journey that began with a quiet act of defiance had blossomed into a movement, a new beginning for fairness and dignity in the aviation world and beyond. Skyward Airlines, once shaken to its core by scandal, was now on a path of transformation, under intense public scrutiny and with guidance from leaders like Alicia. The airline unveiled the Zenith Equity Initiative, an ambitious program designed to eradicate discrimination and embed transparency into every level of operation. At a well-attended launch event held in a sleek conference room overlooking the city skyline, Alicia stepped to the podium. Her presence commanded respect not just as a CEO, but as a catalyst for justice. "Today marks the dawn of a new era," she began, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "An era where every passenger, regardless of background, can expect respect, fairness, and equal treatment in the skies." Behind her, a large screen displayed the Zenith Equity Initiative's pillars: AI-driven monitoring systems, comprehensive staff training programs, and a dedicated fund supporting marginalized groups in aviation careers. Alicia continued, "We have integrated advanced technology to ensure every passenger's experience is protected from bias. Every complaint will be logged and audited by an independent body to prevent cover-ups. And we are investing $30 million into scholarships, mentorships, and career development for women, people of color, and others historically excluded from this industry." Applause filled the room. The initiative was not just a promise, it was a tangible commitment backed by resources and accountability. Among the attendees was Marcus Jordan, a young entrepreneur and longtime advocate for diversity in business. Alicia had invited him to join the Zenith Advisory Council, where his voice and experience would help shape future policies. Marcus stood as Alicia spoke, feeling the weight of the moment. The very system that had once seemed impenetrable was now bending toward justice, and he was proud to be part of that shift. Meanwhile, Jason Lee's role evolved from observer to active participant. Named the initiative's Customer Advocacy Ambassador, he worked closely with the airline to amplify passenger voices and ensure that transparency wasn't just a slogan, but a lived reality. Back in the cabin of a skyward flight months later, the atmosphere was palpably different. The crew greeted every passenger with genuine warmth. Diversity and inclusion were celebrated rather than ignored, and passengers of all backgrounds shared smiles instead of sideways glances. Alicia herself was often aboard flights, not just as CEO, but as a mentor, engaging with staff and customers alike. She witnessed firsthand the progress and knew that while there was still work to be done, the wheels of change were turning. One evening, after a long day of meetings and public appearances, Alicia found a quiet moment on a flight to Chicago. She gazed out the window at the setting sun, its warm glow casting long shadows over the clouds. Her thoughts drifted to the journey, the battles, the heartbreaks, the victories, The moment on that plane when she refused to be erased had sparked a revolution, but it was the countless others who had spoken up, who had joined in solidarity, that truly moved the needle. She smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Justice was not a destination, but a path she was honored to walk with others. Back at Skyward headquarters, the CEO's office was filled with thank you letters and testimonials from employees and passengers who had experienced the airline's new culture. Stories of empowerment, respect, and hope flowed in from around the world. Alicia read them with quiet pride. These voices were the true measure of success. The Zenith Equity Initiative also inspired other industries. Airlines across the globe began adopting similar programs, committing to transparency and accountability. Activists used Alicia's story as a beacon, encouraging more people to stand up against discrimination wherever it occurred. Yet Alicia remained grounded. She understood that change was a constant effort, a daily commitment to fairness and humanity. Her legacy was becoming not just the story of a CEO who stood her ground, but the story of a society willing to confront its prejudices and build a better future. As the plane gently descended toward the runway, Alicia prepared to step into the next chapter, one filled with challenges, but also hope. Because sometimes a single moment of courage can open the skies for all of us. As the evening light filtered softly through the windows of her home office, Alicia Carter sat quietly, the weight of the past months settling around her like a heavy but familiar cloak. The journey that had begun with a simple act of defiance on a private jet had transformed her life and countless others in ways she had never imagined. Now, in this rare moment of solitude, she allowed herself to look inward, reflecting on the path she had traveled and the road still ahead. The room was calm, save for the soft ticking of a clock and the faint hum of the city beyond. Alicia's fingers rested lightly on the smooth surface of her desk, tracing invisible patterns as her mind replayed the events that had propelled her into the spotlight. She thought back to that day on Skyward Airlines flight, Sky 123, the palpable tension in the cabin, the cold gaze of Captain Evelyn Shaw, and the whispered insults that sought to diminish her. How easily the walls of exclusion had closed in, how isolating the moment had been, and yet how resolute she had remained. There had been fear. Yes, fear of being removed, of public scrutiny, of the unknown, but beneath it all, a steely determination that refused to be silenced. Alicia had learned early on that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to move forward despite it. Her thoughts shifted to the passengers who had broken their silence, to Jason Lee's steady camera capturing every moment, and to the waves of support that had surged across social media and beyond. She realized that her solitary act had become a collective voice, a chorus demanding justice and fairness. But the fight had not been without cost. The public scrutiny, the intense pressure to be both a symbol and a leader, had tested her resilience in ways she hadn't anticipated. There were days when the exhaustion felt overwhelming, when the weight of expectation threatened to crush her spirit. In those moments, Alicia found solace in the quiet memories of her childhood, the lessons her mother had imparted about integrity, the sacrifices her family had made, and the dreams they had nurtured. Those roots grounded her, reminding her of the purpose behind her struggle. She also reflected on the subtle battles within herself, the moments of doubt and frustration, the internal dialogues questioning whether one person could truly make a difference. Yet, time and again, she had returned to the truth that change was born in the persistence of small acts, in the courage to stand when it would be easier to sit down. Across town, Jason Lee was wrapping up another meeting, his mind racing with ideas to keep the momentum alive. He had transitioned from a quiet observer to a passionate advocate, channeling his platform to amplify voices that had long been ignored. His work with the Zenith Equity Initiative had given him a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Marcus Jordan, Alicia's colleague and advisor, was deep in thought about the broader implications of their work. The airline industry was just the beginning. There were countless other sectors where hidden biases persisted, waiting to be uncovered and dismantled. Back in the cabin of a skyward flight, changes were visible in the smallest details: a crew member greeting passengers with genuine warmth, a diverse team collaborating seamlessly, and passengers of all backgrounds sharing moments of connection rather than isolation. Yet Alicia knew that progress was a journey, not a destination. The Zenith Equity Initiative had set the foundation, but true transformation required constant vigilance, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. She pulled a notebook toward her and began jotting down ways to deepen community engagement, strategies to support frontline staff, and initiatives to foster ongoing dialogue about equity and inclusion. As the night deepened, Alicia's resolve crystallized. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, fortified by the knowledge that her voice was part of a larger movement, one that would not be silenced. Her legacy was no longer just about a single flight or a single act of courage. It was about inspiring others to stand, to speak, and to build a world where dignity and respect were not privileges, but rights. With a final glance out the window at the city lights shimmering below, Alicia smiled softly. The fight was far from over, but she was not alone. Together, they would keep moving forward one step, one voice, one moment at a time. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows of Skyward Airlines' newest flagship jet. Inside the cabin, a calm but electric energy hummed through the air, a stark contrast to the tension and turmoil that had once defined these same seats. Alicia Carter sat near the window, her posture relaxed yet poised, a quiet smile playing on her lips. The journey from that turbulent flight months ago to this moment had been long and winding, filled with struggle, setbacks, and triumphs. But now, looking around at the diverse faces sharing this space with her pilots, crew, passengers, she felt a deep sense of hope. This was more than just a flight. It was a symbol, a testament to how courage, when met with solidarity, could reshape entire systems and cultures. The Zenith Equity Initiative, born from the fire of Alicia's defiance, had transformed not only Skyward Airlines, but had sparked conversations and reforms across industries worldwide. Policies that once hid behind bureaucratic language now shone with transparency. Technologies designed to monitor fairness were in place, and a dedicated fund empowered countless women, people of color, and marginalized individuals to pursue careers in aviation and beyond. Alicia's thoughts drifted to the countless stories she had heard from those inspired to speak out, to demand justice, to refuse silence. Their voices were the real wings of change lifting communities, industries, and society toward a more equitable future. Beside her, Jason Lee reviewed footage from the flight, already planning new advocacy campaigns. His dedication had evolved into a mission, a calling to ensure that no voice went unheard, no story untold. Marcus Jordan, recently appointed to lead the Zenith Advisory Council, joined the conversation, sharing updates on community engagement initiatives and pilot mentorship programs. Together, they were architects of a new era, one grounded in fairness and fueled by relentless commitment. The captain's voice over the intercom gently announced the approach to the destination city. Passengers prepared for landing, the once unspoken barriers replaced by nods of mutual respect and shared purpose. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, reflecting on the transformation, the flight, the lawsuit threats, the media storms, and the legal battles, it all seemed part of a larger narrative about justice, resilience, and the power of standing firm in one's truth. She remembered the moment when Captain Evelyn Shaw had locked eyes with her. The cold dismissal, the physical removal. That moment was no longer one of shame, but of empowerment. It had been a catalyst. One woman's refusal to be erased had ignited a movement that no system could contain. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from a young woman she had mentored, now preparing to start her training as a pilot. "Thank you," it read simply. "Because of you, I believe I belong." Tears pricked Alicia's eyes, but she smiled through them. This was why she had fought, why she continued to fight. As the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin filled with quiet applause, not loud or boastful, but a gentle recognition of progress and promise. Stepping off the jet, Alicia was greeted by a crowd of supporters, reporters, and advocates. The world had watched her stand, fall, and rise again. Now, they walked with her toward a future shaped by courage and collective action. Her final words to the gathering were simple but powerful. Justice doesn't require thunderous voices. Sometimes it only takes 5 minutes and one person willing to stand. The crowd erupted in applause, a celebration not just of one woman's victory, but of a society awakening to its better self. As Alicia looked toward the horizon, she knew the skies were wide open, no longer a place reserved for the privileged few, but a space where everyone's dignity could soar. And in that vast expanse, the wings of change carried them all. Alicia Carter's story leaves us with more than just inspiration. It challenges us to recognize the quiet but relentless fight against discrimination that still exists today. Her calm strength in the face of prejudice reminds us that dignity is not a privilege, it's a right every human deserves. The injustice she faced on that flight is a harsh reminder that systemic bias still thrives, often hidden behind rules and protocols. But it's also proof that change begins when someone refuses to be silenced. Alicia's courage gave voice to millions who have been overlooked and marginalized, showing us that justice can take flight even in the most unlikely places. As we reflect on this story, let it fuel our collective determination to confront injustice wherever we see it, and to build a world where respect and fairness are the norm, not the exception. If Alicia's journey moved you, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire change. Stay with us as we continue to explore stories of courage, truth, and hope in the face of adversity. Thank you for watching.